Did you know that the earliest Christian churches in the West, and especially in Italy, were actually old repurposed Roman buildings? That's right. Early Christian churches were based on the Roman building, the basilica. A lot of people think that basilica refers to a church, and it does. It does, especially in Italy, Spain, Mexico, any of these Catholic countries. You'll see this term basilica used to refer to a church. But did you know that a basilica was actually a Roman building? I'm Dr. Megan Lorraine Debin, and I'm an art historian, and this is Art Trippin Lecture Series. Hi, I'm Dr. Megan Lorraine Debin, and this is Art Trippin. Let's look at an example of an ancient Roman basilica. This is the Basilica of Constantine. In ancient Rome, a basilica was a rectangular building that had a large central open space and often had a raised apse, which is this kind of rounded bit at the far end across from the entrance. So it's a long rectangular building. On one end is the entrance, and on the other end is the apse, this rounded off area. And basilicas in ancient Rome were essentially civic buildings, and they served a variety of functions, including combination of courthouse, council chamber, and meeting hall. There might be, however, numerous statues of gods displayed in the niches that were set into the walls. But really it was kind of like an audience hall for the emperor and a place for people to meet, discuss, talk business, talk politics. So the idea is that under Constantine and his successors, this type of building was chosen as the basis for the design of the larger places of worship, presumably because the basilica had fewer pagan associations than those of the designs of traditional Greco-Roman temples. And these also allowed for much larger congregations in the interior of the building. So today, the term basilica is used to refer to any large church, and you will hear this all throughout Italy, Latin America, Spain, anywhere where Catholicism is practiced, you'll hear this term basilica. But originally, here we're looking at a cutaway view of the restored Basilica Nova, and you can see this statue of the Emperor Justinian in the apse. This would eventually become the place for the altar in a Catholic church. And this is a restored view because this building no longer exists in its original circumstances. The original building was a massive building, 300 feet long, 21 and a half feet wide, with 115-foot vaulted ceilings. And the layout comes from the cold bathing rooms of the baths, such as the baths of Caracalla. You will notice that there is a central nave with the apse and then these kind of side aisles. You will also notice that there are large windows that allow light and air to flood into the space. There are windows up high and also down below along the aisles. And this really becomes the basis of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, while this Basilica Nova, also called the Basilica of Maxentius and the Basilica of Constantine, this building is no longer extant, but we can go to modern day Germany and see a similar version of this structure. Here's the Aula Palatina, dated to the early 4th century. So this was built when Germany was under the rule of the Roman Empire. So most of these early churches were actually converted Roman basilicas. And in fact, this church, what you're looking at, is today a church. So this is a church in that Roman basilica style. Others that were built new in the early Christian period were still based on this Roman basilica plan. So for example, if we look at arguably one of the most important Catholic churches in the world, here we're looking at Old St. Peter's. This church is no longer in existence. The new St. Peter's rose up on the same site during the Renaissance and Baroque periods. But if you look at Old St. Peter's, you see again a long rectangular building with an entrance, and opposite the entrance an apse. You'll start to see this transept across the end of the building that shows us the future plan of Catholic churches. Now, there are some churches that you can visit in Rome that are done in that original basilica style. Here we're looking at the interior of Santa Sabina. This is dated to about 422 to 432 Common Era. Again, you see a long rectangular building, the central nave. This is the meeting area where today you can see chairs or pews. Remember that originally worshipers would have been standing. So this idea of sitting in chairs or pews is a very modern concept. Flanking the nave are 2 rows of columns with rounded Roman arches, and these rows of columns separate the nave from the side aisles. If you walk into the church on the opposite side of the building, you will see a rounded apse. This is where the altar is, and you will also see lots of imagery decorating this curved part of the building. This is where all of the focus in the Catholic Mass is going. So everybody's sort of facing this way, and this is where most of the imagery would have been depicted. And so you can see when you look at the interior of Santa Sabina in Rome, you can see that it's really coming from that early Roman basilica, especially when you compare it to the Aula Palatina in modern day Germany. If you look at the interior of Santa Sabina next to the interior of the Pantheon, you can see the influence of Roman architecture in the coffered ceiling, the rounded arches, and the use of the columns. In this case, they are Corinthian columns. Now, at the same time that this basilica plan was evolving, we also do see the central planned church of the early Christian period. And so one really great example is Santo Stefano Rotondo. That's right, Saint Stephen the Round, because the church is literally round, and this is in Rome, dated to about 470 CE. When you look at Santo Stefano Rotondo, you can see that it's a centrally planned church with the altar in the center, and the worshipers would be standing in this kind of walkway around the central altar. We can also see this when we look at the interior of Santa Costanza in Rome, dated a little bit earlier to 337 to 351. And you see again a central plan building, a big rotunda, a round dome over the center, and an ambulatory or circular walkway that's separated from the central area by columns. This church, Santa Costanza, was built as a mausoleum for Constantina, who was Emperor Constantine's daughter. So she stayed in Rome when Constantine went to Constantinople. What you will see when you go into Santa Costanza, which, yes, it was originally intended as a mausoleum, but it was also consecrated as a church. What you will see when you look at the ceiling of the ambulatory are Roman style mosaics. So the Roman art style lives on into this early Christian period. All of the Roman artists are still making art. We just see a shift in the subject matter. So here we can see the vault mosaics in the ambulatory of Santa Costanza. You can see a central image that's probably a portrait of Constantina herself, surrounded by these sort of swirling vines and flowers and animal imagery. So this imagery was not only common in Roman funerary art, but also had its own meaning and its own association in the Christian context. So, for example, you can see these little putti. The putti are these little cherubic angels. They're like little baby angels. They are harvesting grapes and producing wine in this image. Now, of course, this could be associated with the pagan god Bacchus, the god of wine, but in the Christian context, wine also is a reference to the blood of Christ, as wine is used in the Eucharist to represent Christ's blood. So here you can really see this mixing of styles, this Roman heritage and this new Christian iconography. Now, as I mentioned in the last video, we will see a shift. Constantine moves the capital to Constantinople, but there's still a western outpost in Italy, and this moves from Rome to Ravenna. So we see a big shift in power to Ravenna by about the 5th century CE, and we will start to see lots of production of art and imagery to decorate the churches in Ravenna. Now, if you want to learn more about Ravenna, stay tuned for our next video on Byzantine art in Ravenna. If you like this video, please subscribe to arttrippin here on YouTube. You can also check us out at arttrippin on Tik Tok and arttrippin with Prof D on Instagram. You can find short form content on those platforms. As always, I'm Dr. Megan Lorraine Debin, and this has been Arttrippin, the lecture series.